So hi, my name is Lane. What I'm going to try to tell you about are 3 ways in which the work that we did with JFREJ, Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, helped us move forward and help make a stronger movement for domestic workers. So 3 things. One is ritual, the way that we use religion to invigorate campaigns, and vice versa, the way we use campaigns to invigorate our rituals. 2 is identity, the way that contact between the employers of domestic workers that we organized, contact between them and workers led to transformations with both. And 3 is access, the way that by creating a coalition between Jewish employers of domestic workers and workers, we were able to frame the debate in such a way that gave us access to forward movement in the campaign work. So first I'll tell you a little bit about what JFREJ is. So Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, we're a membership-based community organizing organization in New York. I live here now, but I used to work on staff there, and now I'm still a member. And it started a little over 20 years ago. There was lots of radical Jews working in New York as activists, but they weren't doing it as Jews. They were part of ACT UP. They were part of Palestinian Solidarity. There was all these radical causes that they were involved in. But I think so. What happened at a certain time was they realized, well, if they worked together as Jews, there were certain points of access and certain ways of claiming power and privilege that they could use to make the work. To make their work as individual activists even stronger. So I got involved because I wanted to do some kind of anti-racist worker solidarity work, and I wanted to be involved with people who understood where I was coming from. I have this white privilege. I'm queer. I don't know that much about this stuff, and turns out this was an organization where basically everybody was queer. They all had these backgrounds, having gone to Jewish day school, having some kind of economic privilege. Not everybody, but that was a really common experience. And they had some really good political analysis. And so it was a really welcoming community for me, even though I hadn't even thought about my identity as Jewish as a strong part of my identity. So the use of religion and ritual. I'm gonna try to tell you as many of these little stories as I can because I like them all, and I think there's a few that illustrate each of these points. So as I first got involved, so I got involved in the domestic worker organizing campaign, where we were organizing an Employers for Justice network, basically finding through our access to people in synagogues. To belong to a synagogue, you have to have some money. You have to have enough money to join a synagogue, which means that when you have a baby, you are likely to hire a nanny if you belong to a synagogue. And so it was possible to find wealthy Jews who employed nannies in liberal and progressive synagogues, so who might have had some kind of orientation towards thinking about these issues in a different way and not being horrible people. So we had an event right when I started called Seder in the Streets. It was actually during Passover, we're during Passover right now. Yeah. So it's actually 5 years since I got involved that we did this event, and the idea was that we would use our Jewish ritual of a Seder, which celebrates the liberation story of the Jews, to tell the story of why we are involved in a campaign for domestic worker justice. So we had this basically a festival at a park, and one of the booths at the festival was you could dress up with a staff and be Moses, and it was Moses was a community organizer and Pharaoh was an employer or whatever, and you got to practice making the arguments that we would make when we go to lobby day. So it was training people to go lobby in the New York State Legislature while it was teaching people about this story. We had another booth where I don't know if people know the story of how the Hebrews had to paint lamb's blood on their doors so that they'd be passed over by the angel of death. And so what that was an instance of people claiming their identity in order to lead to their liberation. And so what we did was just had people make buttons where they identify as an employer who supports their workers in a way where claiming your identity was a way to lead to collective liberation. So we found a lot of ways to blend the rituals from our religion into the campaign work. And for me, that gave me a renewed sense of my Jewish identity. I practice Judaism now because I found a way to do my activism through my religion. One other point about the ritual and religion that I thought is really awesome that's not related to domestic workers is JFREJ was there every day at Occupy Wall Street. So again, I haven't been in New York for a while, so I don't remember the exact dynamics of this, but they weren't allowed to have permanent structures at the encampment. But the Jewish holiday of Sukkot, where you put up temporary structures to symbolize how the Hebrews camped out in the desert as they were, going from Egypt. That happened during the Occupy movement, right when they wanted to be able to put up structures. And so JFREJ put up a sukkah, and because there was a religious reason why they were putting it up, the police couldn't tell them to take it down. So it was actually crucial that there was a religious aspect there to move the whole movement forward. So that was really awesome, and if the Jews hadn't been there doing that, it wouldn't have been possible. Okay, there's other stories about ritual that I'd love to tell. But the next thing I'll talk about is this identity and the way that contact between employers and workers led to transformation. So, all right, so there's this one leader who was a member of JFREJ. Her name is Caroline, and she was one of these synagogue members. She's a liberal, I think, probably identified as a second wave feminist. And what she realized for herself was that when we think about domestic work, we think about it on a lot of different vectors, but one is as women's work. And how whether it's paid or unpaid, women's work is not respected, is not given the dignity it deserves. But what she realized was that even if she herself isn't the one doing the work, as the woman of the house, she's responsible for making sure the work gets done. And so she's the one responsible for having this really awkward and an incomplete relationship with the domestic worker in her home, with the person cleaning her home. So she was the one who had no regulations, no guidelines for how to have a respectful relationship. And so she was the one who was basically the buffer class between her, husband who controlled the money, and this worker who would be suffering, if she wasn't using the right practices. And so it actually, this idea of women's work was actually pitting these two women against each other potentially, but she, through her experience in this organizing, was able to see how it actually allowed them to have their struggles be the same. Another way that identities moved us forward, the way that identities interacting together moved us forward, was a really simple story. We've been organizing in solidarity with Domestic Workers United and other domestic worker organizations in New York City, but they were the ones that we worked with the most. We worked with them for many years, and our members know each other very well. The political analysis in Domestic Workers United, they talk a lot about feminism. I don't think the analysis or the population, the number of people that identify as openly queer in that organization is not nearly as much as the population of people that identify as queer in JFREJ. But because they knew each other and because they knew each other's stories, they began to know about each other's lives in that way. And so there was an opportunity just like a couple years ago where Domestic Workers United was awarded a grant for like $50,000 from an organization a community organizing organization that was Catholic, and part of the stipulations of receiving the grant was that they couldn't be involved in any LGBT related organizing. and they were going to accept it, but then there were members who said, well, wait, well, what about AJ? What about Katie? What about all these people that like have supported us so much? Like, we can't do this. What if they need us sometime? And they actually did not. They refused the grant. So, you know, that it's, you know, they're still okay, you know? Everything's okay. Okay, so then the last thing I wanted to talk about was access. The way that having this unexpected coalition gave us access in places where we were able to move the campaign forward. So I want to tell both of these stories. So one was that the Speaker of the Assembly in New York State, who is arguably the most powerful person in New York State politics. His name is Sheldon Silver. He's an Orthodox Jew. And the whole coalition had a really hard time reaching him. He didn't need to pay any attention to organizing groups. He just didn't need to. He had so much power. But we were tasked with trying to find some way through Jewish channels to get to him, to have some influence on him. And it was hard, but we had gotten access to this really important guy at another Jewish organization whose wife was the chief of staff for Sheldon Silver. And that was really cool, but she said she wouldn't really do anything for us. Or no, he said he wouldn't talk to his wife. That was out of bounds. But after a few years of organizing and getting other synagogues involved, getting a good array of synagogues from different denominations, we finally flexed some of our muscle, and we held a huge event called the Jewish Community Stands with Domestic Workers. And we made a citywide declaration that the Jews are with the domestic workers. If you're a Jewish legislator, you got to come out to this. You have to show your support. And you know, after all these years of not even getting his ear, he sent a staffer to our event, which was amazing. It was like really cool. But then 5 days later, at our lobby day, after like 8 years of organizing, the coalition got their first ever face-to-face meeting with Sheldon Silver. Now, we don't know if that is exactly what led to it, but he mentioned the event. He had heard about it. He had heard that we had given a great reception to his staff person, and so that was one way that we got access for the whole coalition through a use of those religious channels. The other thing I wanted to talk about, which I think is really exciting, is that because we started out years ago saying that employers and workers both have an interest in there being better regulations for workers, for domestic work. We made all kinds of arguments for that. It leads to a more stable workforce. It's through the Jewish values. It's teaching your kids good values. We made lots of cases for this. Because we had made that case, and because we organized employers, once the law passed, and this big question came up of like, well, how are we going to implement this? And also, is it possible for there to be collective bargaining for domestic workers? Because that was something that the law didn't allow for, but it allowed for, if anybody else in this room knows more about it, you can correct me, but it said, we're not going to let you collectively bargain, but we'll implement a study about the feasibility of collective bargaining for domestic workers. And so because we had already developed this coalition, we were able to say, okay, we'll work together on that feasibility study. We'll do a pilot domestic worker dialogue in Park Slope, where we had been doing a lot of organizing, where our key leaders who are already used to talking about the ways that employment works for them, they'll meet together and they'll figure out the standards for the whole neighborhood. And so it wasn't that like the state had to find a random smattering of employers who could have had all kinds of different horrible practices or whatever. It was that here we have the employers for you, and the bonus is they have great race and class analysis. They've been doing the work. They know these workers. They know how to have the conversation. And so because we had started that coalition ahead of time, we were able to have access to that next step and to have some credibility with the State of New York Department of Labor to be able to do that work together. So at the very beginning, it may have looked like ridiculous that you had employers who were supporting this work, but now it was just seen as the standard, and the state needs employers to talk about this work, and so we were ready. That's it. So basically, it's the employer organizing and the religious organizing leading to through ritual identity and framing the debate, leading to access and wins and transformation in the campaign.